Hello, this is Scottish Independence podcast number 182, and this is the third of a little series in which we're talking about constitutions. The first was a talk with John Drummond, then just a reading of the Declaration of Arbroath, and this third one is John Drummond and Mark McNaught launching a project called the Clyde-Built Constitution, which they point out during the talk is not Glasgow-centric, it's about the renowned quality of things that were Clyde-built. The project that they were launching was a kind of crowdsourced constitution, and looking on their website, which is ScotishConstitution.com, the whole project seems to have slowed down a little bit, but you can go on and have a look and see what they're doing with it there anyway. Even though the project has slowed down a lot, the talk is very, very interesting here and goes into some important areas that I think we need to think about in future. There was a bit of an echo in the room when they recorded it, but I did my best to tidy it up. Hope you enjoy, and I'll have a wee word with you at the end.
How many countries, developed countries, allow clerics to vote and make laws? There are only two countries in the world. UK is one? Yeah. Two ticks in the UK. Iran. Iran is the only developed country in the world, apart from the UK, that allows clerics to make laws. Here's a list of names. The first name is Mr. Brass Cosby. Any idea who Mr. Brass Cosby is or may have been? What about Adrian Wild Pollock? I haven't made these names up, by the way. What about Leslie Bowker? No? What about Geoffrey Arden Peacock? Paul Dunn? Okay, we'll come back to that. Because it's crucial to this point here. Okay, what is the Constitution? I think the version that Mark and I prefer, rather than the reads, which Mark would be happy to do, I'm sure, on what constitutes a constitution. We tried to shorten it into everyday language, and we came up with this. It's what a country stands for, and what it will not stand for. Why does it matter? Well, it matters this way. There are four main reasons for having a written constitution. Inclusion, which means that people are guaranteed to be treated the same, regardless of creed, regardless of social status, regardless of income, regardless, full stop. So it's about inclusion. And it's guaranteed in a written form. In other words, the government of the day can't alter it. They can't say, we're fed up with you guys voting the wrong way, so in future you can't vote. We don't like people under 16 voting or under 18 voting, and we can change that. So okay. We couldn't do that. That would have to be dealt with by all the people. Popular sovereignty. In other words, that the power rests with the people. You. Not with a crown parliament, which Mark will tell you eloquently in a second about. It doesn't rest with somebody whose forebears slept with Charles I. It doesn't rest with somebody who is a bishop. It doesn't rest with the Queen. It doesn't rest with it. It rests with the people. The people are sovereign. Reassurance. I'd really like to spend a few seconds on this, if I may, because it's hugely important, and it's often missed or undervalued. Let me tell you what I mean. How many people in here would like to see an independent Scotland? Put your hands up. Thank you. I'm not hugely surprised, but I have to say, if I went to a different group of people, I would get a different answer. And one of the reasons I would get a different answer is because some people are very frightened. They're very frightened indeed. They're frightened what you are going to do to them should Scotland become independent. Why would they be frightened? Sorry? Yeah, but there's lots of money things. I don't know. Electricity bills.
Maybe frightened of retribution.
Retribution? So how do you deal with somebody who's frightened of retribution? Are you frightened of you?
Constitution and maintain their rights.
Exactly. What you do is you have to say to people, there's a piece of paper which all of these political parties have committed to, and the whole nation is committed to, which will provide you with a guarantee that you will not be victimised if there is a change in the constitution of this country. It's hugely important. And very often people who feel frightened become very argumentative. And sometimes it's helpful to go beyond the emotion to find out what drives that. And very often it's a deep sense of insecurity. And it's important to address that, rather than assume that because you happen to believe something and you don't think it's frightening, that everyone else will feel the same way. They don't. They just don't. And we have evidence here from the survey to show that. Recognition. That's also important. Recognition is important when you have a discussion about how to bring about constitutional change. For example, we've all heard of Section 30, it is, I think, where the Prime Minister or the government of the day gives its permission for a referendum. That's what happened in 2014. A lot of people feel that that's inappropriate and they shouldn't have to go seeking somebody else's permission to carry out a plebiscite. Trouble with that, which is sometimes called UDI, Unilateral Declaration of Independence, is that it doesn't confer recognition from elsewhere. You then have to fight all over again to persuade the United Nations, to persuade other countries that you've done the right thing. If you go through the channels, that's not a problem, because it's built in. Hugely important. And a country is much more likely to be recognised if it has a constitution than if it doesn't. Okay.
How will you get a referendum of the governing, the ones that are in power, so you can not get?
Well, that's why you have statesmen rather than politicians. A statesman is, the difference between a statesman and a politician, or in the case of Scotland, a stateswoman and a politician, is that they understand that you go gently, and you take people with you at every stage, and you reassure them. But it takes much longer. But the advantage at the end of the day is that everyone is signed up. Because look what's happening in Brexit. There's a classic case of just rushing at the fences and saying, yeah, all we have to do is have a plebiscite. Now we've got various groups being criticised because they did it illegally, the rules weren't laid down, not like the Scottish referendum in 2014. There's a huge difference between these two. So, we decided to carry out a poll in Scotland and across Great Britain to see if people understood constitutional terms. Because unless you understand the lexicon, i.e. what the words mean, life is very difficult. And people have to be excused for not understanding the words. The Prime Minister doesn't understand the words. She talks about countries and states and nations as if they all meant the same. They don't. They don't. In other countries, 7-year-old children know the difference. Why? Because they've studied their own constitution since they were that high. And they've been tested on it. So we did this poll. We're very grateful to the Scottish Independence Foundation for supporting it. Because without them, it would not have happened. And meetings like this would have been difficult to achieve. We drafted it in the Constitution. Panel Base, a very reputable polling company, conducted it. Over 1,000 Scots were polled, and over 2,000 people across the GB, which includes the 1,000 Scots. The fieldwork was between the 2nd and 5th November, and it's the first of its kind in the UK. Any other country in the world would do this every year or so. But because nobody understands constitutions, it's very difficult to get people excited about the subject. So, what did we find out from all these Scots? Only 12% of Scots do not want a written constitution. So if I were a member of the then I think I'd be interested in talking to people about the absence of a written constitution. Because I would know that only 12% of the folks I'm talking to were opposed to the idea. It's very rare you get a chance to talk about something, and you'll learn in a second from Mark how difficult it will be for the people who are opposed to change to run counter to this. So, and this will probably come as no surprise to anyone here, only 28% of Scots think that the media supports democratic processes. That's very low. Amongst SNP supporters, we're talking much less than that.
I think I saw a survey of all of the European countries and their trust in the media. UK, rock bottom. Just to the bottom.
So, why is supporting democratic processes important? Well, the simple answer is, if you don't have a written constitution, you over-rely upon institutions, like NHS, like the police, like the media. You have to rely on these institutions because you don't have anything in writing that guarantees your rights. All of your rights just now, sitting in this room just now, depend upon European legislation. So you can see the problem. Come next year, all of that may well disappear. So you would expect the media to be doing a good job. That's not what Scots think. 35% of Scots do not think the House of Commons supports democratic processes. That's over a third of all Scots do not believe that the House of Commons, which is the primary legislature in the whole of the UK, and to which the Scottish Parliament, by the way, is subservient, supports democratic processes. Of course, for the House of Lords, it drops even further, with only 23% of Scots believing they support democratic processes. The Scots Parliament rates 47% in terms of supporting democratic processes. And bear in mind, that includes 20% of Tory supporters who agree. So, if Tory supporters were excluded, this number would be well over 50%. But the Scottish Parliament is viewed negatively by Conservative supporters. The EU, for all of its sins, rates better than the House of Commons. 77% of Scots agree with our layperson's description of a constitution, that it represents what the country stands for and what it will not stand for. So, if one talks about these sort of issues, you're pushing against an open door for Scots. And by the way, that percentage is much the same across the rest of the UK. This is incredible. Remember this about clerics making laws? 81% of Scots say no. If you ask men in Scotland, over 55, 95% of men over 55 say no. I don't know who the one person was that said they liked it. So, again, if I was a politician and I wanted to generate some warm feeling about the things I was planning to do, then clearly this is an issue which people feel very strongly about. Now remember, the House of Lords contains 21 bishops, plus many other clerics.
Is it higher for Scotland than for the UK as a whole?
Marginally, which is interesting, isn't it? If you talk about it later, I'll give you the precise figures, but they're available, by the way, on the Scottish Independence Foundation website. You'll see all the data sets. So I'm simply giving you selected material. Sorry, sir.
The clerics say.
Subdivision of clerics. But I can tell you that Lib Dems are huge supporters of a written constitution. So, were I an SNP candidate, which I'm not a member of the SNP, but if I were an SNP candidate standing in a Lib Dem constituency, I'd be looking at this material very seriously. Okay, remember the gentleman at the beginning? Do you remember these nice folks we talked about? Way back. Brass Cosby and Adrian Wild Paul Double. They're all holders of the office of City Remembrancer. City Remembrancer. The City Remembrancer sits close by the Speaker and the House of Commons, where the laws are made, bureaus are made. The City Remembrancer's job is to make sure that Parliament, the views of the City of London are properly represented by the House of Commons. He sits close to the Speaker and sees all draft legislation. Note this: the City of London is the only part of Great Britain over which Parliament has no authority. So someone sits in your Parliament representing a particular interest group, and the Parliament has no control or authority over that individual. You see why we need to have something like this? Yes?
So when you say the City of London, you mean the financial centre?
I mean, he said, no, I mean the financial district. the technical definition for the City of London is the bit in the middle. The rest of London is related to balance. The City of London elects its own representatives. So, enough about the jerry-built. Let's move on to the Clyde-Built. Hand over to Mark. Thank you very much. Just roll side.
Okay, thank you for coming. And first of all, I want to, I'm just to be clear. I know probably most of you got the link from the website where we have Peter in the back there has been very helpful in developing this website about this draft constitution. And it's been the culmination of several years of work. When I first got interested in the process back in 2011, 2012. I was able to make contact with John and our colleagues who could be with us, Elliot Palmer. Elliot and John were gracious enough to receive me when I came to Scotland, and I got a copy of, Elliot sent me a copy of his draft constitution on Word format, and I just began to play around with it. Changing things, moving things around, adding different ideas. And so with that core, and John can correct me if I'm wrong, but I know that Elliot's draft was also based on previous SNP drafts as well, or was influenced by them, or...
McCormick.
Yeah, the McCormick draft particularly. And so this has come to fruition on the ScotIshConstitution.com website. I'm sure some of you will begin to have a look at it. I don't have the technical equipment to go through it in more detail, but it is and so what I'll do is I'll make a few remarks about it and then I will talk in more detail, more informally about how I've structured it, and also how you can get involved and how we can take this forward. Because if we let's say when we do it, it will be the first constitution of this type that has been developed, on a broad scale, using anybody who wants to participate, anybody who wants to contribute. You don't have to be a specialist, you don't have to be a jurist, you just have to be someone who is interested in learning about it, learning the dynamics, and taking a small part of something that you want to work on, that you care about, and helping us develop it. And so I'll speak more about that after. Again, thank you for coming. And first, I'd like to begin by emphasizing how fortunate we are just to be able to be here at the Pearce Institute and discuss how to build a modern democratic Scotland. This small yellow flower that I have on my left shoulder was given to me by a Catalan friend when I was in Barcelona for the Diada back on 11th September, in solidarity with the members of the Catalan government who were in exile or political prisoners in jail without bail for over a year. Several of which I know personally. And I just heard this morning that two of the Catalan political prisoners, Jordi Sanchez and Jordi Turull, have now started a hunger strike, and in an effort to get their cases heard urgently by the European Court of Human Rights. So they risked 30 years in prison, and their crime was to assert Catalan sovereignty and designing and implementing the Catalan Republic. Exactly what we're talking about here today in the case of Scotland. If we were in Catalonia, the Spanish Guardia Civil could raid and beat us for impunity, just for peaceful civic engagement. And so while there are certain similarities between the Catalan and the Scottish independence processes, at the very least, we're not facing UK police truncheons and rubber bullets, and Scottish elected officials and civic leaders are not in jail or on hunger strikes for discussing Scotland's constitutional future. So just, we should take a minute to say that we're able to sit here and talk about it is very special and very important. And, I've thought during my life, if only I could have been back, in 1776 when Jefferson and Madison and all they were talking about. And so that's what's, really motivated me to a large extent is how, but it's, I could not think of a more symbolically relevant place to hold the launch of the Clyde-Built Constitution here at the Pearce Institute in Govan, which has served so much of a vital hub for Govan and the shipbuilding communities. over the decades and even the centuries. And for me, it's very personal. My father was born to 217 Langlands Road, just down the road across from the Elder Library, to a family of engineers who worked at Fairfield shipyards for many generations. My grandfather worked on an engineer on ships going to India, and I have an Indian imperial passport. I'll show it to you after my remarks. It's a real relic because I don't know how much. I know he at least went once back and forth to India as an engineer. Probably was likely setting sail from here. So one of my great grandfathers was the head foreman and riveter at Fairfield and was killed by a falling crane in the shipyards back in the 1920s. So my parents met at the St. Mary's Episcopal Church on Great Western Road here in Glasgow, while my mother was on her junior year abroad in the U.S. My parents married and lived in Edinburgh until the mid-1960s, when difficulties obliged them to move to the U.S. and seek a different life, to which I was born in 1968. I could have just as easily been born here in Scotland if my parents hadn't moved, but this has certainly not influenced my sense of identity. I feel it's more Scottish than anything else, even though I live in France. I'm American. I've lived in different places, but for me, I'm Scottish. It's the prevailing predominant identity for me, certainly. And this story is very typical of many in the Scots diaspora that you meet often, very frequently, who had to leave and migrate to seek a better life. Not because they wanted to leave Scotland and leave their loved ones and leave their family, but the opportunity simply didn't exist here. And so this helps explain why Scots have a kind of a naturally migratory nature. And it also helps explain my own story and again, my motivation for trying to play some role in this process. So if anyone doubts my motives, sincerity, or goodwill, or thinks I'm just some arrogant American academic coming over to Scotland to perform some constitutional experiments, please rest assured that I've devoted the last 7 years of my academic career to this endeavor, because I'm literally doing it for family. So in my remarks today, I want us first to think about what it means to have a written constitution, and John certainly has touched on this to a large degree as well. Then I want to examine Scotland's current status within the constitution from my perspective, having studied political science. I teach law and political science in Rennes, so I come at it from a relatively academic perspective, but also, in my teaching, I've over the years, I've tried to hone a technique that really kind of is able to distill the ideas into things that people can easily understand. And so I'll examine Scotland's current status within the UK Constitution, which is arguably the most feudal, incoherent governing system on earth. Then I will share my views on discussion over a constitution. Then I will share my views on why discussion over a constitution did not occur on a broad scale prior to the 2014 referendum campaign. Finally, now that discussion has begun, now that we've begun to discuss these types of things and how we can construct a better Scotland, how do we employ ingenuity, precision, science, research, and goodwill, a lot of goodwill, to build an enduring and adaptable constitution and legal system? So, as John was mentioning, as people in other countries, of course, including the United States, we learn about the Constitution from an early age. There were morning children's cartoons explaining how a bill becomes a law. I can recite the preamble to the U.S. Constitution because they made a catchy cartoon song out of it. High school students learn how the federal governing system works, or at least how it's supposed to work. And we learn concepts like checks and balances and separation of powers. And also, the Constitution is a genuine source of pride for many Americans. I think it's the oldest existing, still operable Constitution, and it's shown those years in a way that I'll speak about in a minute. But it's seen as such a fundamental symbol, it's almost like Holy Writ, almost like and there are people that consider the Constitution to be an extension of the Bible. That's kind of a more kind of Christian way of looking at it. But again, it's very admired, adhered to, and it's something you don't touch. You don't want to mess with it. And so if you try to, what is a constitution? And I like I really like the use of metaphors to try to explain things, complicated things in ways that people can understand. So in that spirit, the U.S. Constitution can be viewed as the software or the operating system of the federal government. And by 18th century standards, the framers of the 1789 document designed a relatively ingenious system of checks and balances to assure that no one branch of government accumulated too much power. There's a separation of powers between the legislative branch, which writes the laws, the executive, which applies the laws, and the judiciary, which interprets the laws. Now, the U.S. Constitution has been amended 27 times, 10 of which are the Bill of Rights adopted in 1791, which includes such basic rights as freedom of speech, religion, the right to bear arms, for better or for worse, as well as fundamental procedural rights of the accused, including prohibition against unreasonable search and seizure, the right to counsel, right to trial by jury, and others. So, but in its function since 1789, because it's a relatively loose governing framework. It's got the Congress, the presidency, the judiciary, but it's not a very long document. And because it's kind of been a loose framework, it's been able to withstand the challenges, for example, of the Civil War, of secession and Reconstruction of the 1860s and 1870s, despite the country separating war and going to war. It reconstructed and it's still functioning. And it has expanded rights to blacks, women, former slaves, homosexuals, and other minorities, however imperfect. Again, but it has demonstrated the capacity, especially through the 14th Amendment clause of equal protection under the law, that rights have been able to be expanded to different minority groups. So it has functioned in important ways. During the 1930s, under the New Deal, and under the 1960s, Lyndon Johnson's Great Society, it's been a platform upon which the federal government has expanded its regulatory powers to help shape society for the better. For example, the creation of the Social Security pension system, or health insurance for the elderly, and other important programs, and most specifically regulatory agencies like banking regulation, environmental regulation, farming, all these that have played an important role. And in my view, were very much these institutions created, especially in the 1930s under the New Deal, were absolutely were so important for assuring helping to assure the great wave of prosperity in the United States, especially in the post-war period throughout the 50s and the 60s, which made, and I think arguably a large part of that was these institutions. So, however, in the intervening years, I've observed kind of a shriveling of the Constitution to a point where a document ratified in 1789 struggles to stay relevant for a government which is now, in my view, completely overpowered and suffocated by a corrupt corporate oligarchy. I mean, the degree to which multinational corporations, all of these things have just, strangled the political system. It's incontrovertible. It's incontrovertible. There's no question it has. And I've done courses in U.S. campaign finance before, and you just, you get sick to your stomach looking at what, the way it works. 1991 fails to keep pace with a rapidly evolving world. What does the Fourth Amendment guarantee against illegal search and seizure mean in the digital age? Not much. The U.S. Code, or federal law, so all of the U.S. laws compiled since 1791, over 2 centuries. If you go to the Library of Congress and you see the U.S. Code, it's shelf after shelf after shelf after shelf of federal law. And so the frame of law is, I don't know how many thousands, tens of thousands of pages of law. So if you're trying to figure out what the law is in a particular context, it's very difficult, and it's so subject to interpretation. And also because it's so diffuse, long, complicated, that it requires expensive lawyers to expand, to understand, and interpret, thus basically shutting off the justice system for most of the population. And also recent Supreme Court decisions have weakened voting rights, environmental rights, workers' rights, and the right of people controls over their own bodies. And equal protection under the law has become really not much more than words on parchment. So, using the analogy of the Constitution as this governing software, to continue with this analogy, if American governance is running on Windows 1789, Scotland's been running its software on Windows 1707. Under the terms of 1707 Acts of Union, Scotland's Parliament was abolished, maybe some say suspended permanently, whatever, but there was no more Scottish Parliament. And Scotland sent MPs to Westminster to represent Scottish interests. Perhaps David Mundell's less involved ancestors were among them. Since then, Scotland has lived under perhaps the most execrable and incoherent constitution on earth, the UK Constitution. As a political scientist, examining the UK Constitution has been like looking under a rock and seeing lots of gross bugs. It's more of a feudal constitutional scrapyard than anything resembling a coherent governing structure. You still have kings, dukes, earls, the House of Lords, and of course the monarch. And so really 13th century aristocratic social hierarchy and social inequality are still baked into the UK constitutional cake. So in essence, if you want to kind of paraphrase what the UK Constitution, how it can be seen as basically a dog's breakfast of divine right sovereignty of the Crown and Parliament, ancient documents like the Magna Carta of 1215 and the English Bill of Rights of 1689, long-deceased Westminster imperialist jurists like Coke, Blackstone, and Dicey, thrown in with piles of incomprehensible and usually inapplicable case law. There are reams of Westminster laws dating back centuries which not only entrench the UK feudal hierarchy, but also continue to be adopted and applied in the most archaic and incomprehensible fashion imaginable. Maybe you've seen the short video that Independence Live put together of Mary Black talking about the ways that if they want members' bills and how they ask for quorums and then they can't, this type of thing, and it's still done that way. And, so now, improbably, so the basis of legitimacy of rather than being popular sovereignty as it is in most normal countries, the basis of legitimacy of the UK state remains parliamentary sovereignty based on divine right. It basically boils down to the UK imperialist hallucination that the monarch is the monarch because God said so, and because of this divine appointment, Parliament can pass any law it wants, which can be applied anywhere on earth. Put in the more secular language of the jurist Dicey, quote, "The principle of parliamentary sovereignty means neither more nor less than this, namely that Parliament has, under the English Constitution," the English one, "the right to make any law whatever, and further, that no person or body is recognized by the law of England as having a right to override or set aside the legislation of Parliament." Now that has been changed somewhat since joining the European Union. That has been mitigated somewhat, but that is the classical vision of parliamentary sovereignty, or sometimes called parliamentary supremacy. And also inherent in this Westminster notion of sovereignty is that it cannot be divided or else it is destroyed. The idea of shared sovereignty is completely alien to this UK notion, and that we see that in the Brexit debate, the idea that they've taken the UK sovereignties, we need to bring it back. Because in this classical view, again, it's whole, and in their view, it cannot be divided, or else it's destroyed. It was the same thing back in 1776 in the United States. They had that same vision, and that's why we bailed. And so, let's see. So Westminster. So in the case of Scotland, Westminster can devolve or lend powers to the Scottish Parliament, but they cannot lend sovereignty. That's their red line. The Constitution of Scotland is not a matter for... the Constitution of Scotland is a reserved matter for the UK, over which it has full sovereignty. So basically, Scotland is at the UK's constitutional mercy. So since 1707, no Scot has ever held sovereignty over a square centimetre of Scottish soil or territorial waters. How else could the Highland clearances be legal? How else could the wealth of Scottish oil be funneled to Westminster to squander on the London sewer and nuclear submarines parked 20 miles from here? This can all be done without the consent of the Scottish people because Scotland is sovereign under the archaic UK Constitution. So, and this demonstrates that the UK Constitution is essentially whatever the current government says it is. So you can have Theresa May invoking royal prerogative or Henry VIII powers for her government to unilaterally write Brexit bills, stripping the powers from the Scottish Parliament without Westminster approval, let alone Holyrood. There's no way Theresa May could even attempt that if there were a codified constitution that would with a separation of powers. What can this power do? What can that power do? And be able to enforce that and apply that, going to a Supreme Court if that's necessary. But if I'm not mistaken, the UK Supreme Court cannot rule over Westminster law. Yeah, right.
Well, by definition, if an entity is sovereign, then nothing else can overrule it.
Yeah, right. Exactly. So,
and by the way, it appoints the members of the Supreme Court.
Oh, okay. Even worse. Right. So, and so, if the U.S. Constitution can be viewed as a largely coherent, although somewhat dated, instruction manual describing how the government should operate, the UK is more of what I would consider a box of constitutional flashcards thrown into the air, strewn all over the floor, there for any prime minister or government to pick up a card of the 14th century and apply it in 2018. That's basically the UK constitutional state of affairs. So since the adoption of the Scotland Act in 1997 and the establishment of the Scottish Parliament in 1999, the Scottish government has exercised certain devolved powers, as the list of powers, health, education, housing, tourism, etc. And the SNP government has exercised them with increasing competence. However, Westminster continues to exercise full sovereignty over Scotland and the powers of the Scottish government, and which are overbearingly controlled by the Westminster Written Scotland Act and Scottish Parliamentary Standing Order. So these are the laws under which the Scottish government can basically operates. Typical of Westminster legislation, it's hideously complex, impenetrably written, and has the principal objective of maintaining the prevailing UK hierarchy over Scotland. Simply stated, Westminster keeps Holyrood on a very short constitutional leash. And the Brexit fiasco has demonstrated just how fragile even the devolution settlement is. If the Westminster government is allowed to succeed, the Holyrood government is said at the very least to be stripped of its powers, if not abolished, if Brexit goes in a certain way. In essence, Scots are still essentially subjects of the UK Crown and Parliament, not sovereign citizens in their own right. This irrefutably demonstrates that Scots have never lived under a codified written constitution, only the bizarre anomaly that I described. All UK rights are written into law, so they can be abolished by any parliament. Therefore, no Scot has ever had a constitutionally guaranteed right. Yes?
What about the Declaration of our Oath?
It's hard to say what degree that has legal standing now. I mean, we could certainly go back to to that and saying that it declares sovereignty, but then with 1707, that the sovereignty was handed to the Crown and Parliament. And I've read through the Declaration of Arbroath, and it's not easy to follow. And you have to, especially with these documents of that age, you have to read through and kind of figure out what they're trying to say. And they make references to things that no longer exist. And so, and while the Declaration of Arbroath is an important document which asserts Scottish sovereignty and the first of its kind, which has influenced many documents since, it's difficult to say what legal standing it has at this point. And you also have a claim of right, which is much more recent, which was reaffirmed recently by the Westminster Parliament, which basically says that Scots, can decide their own constitutional future. So I think that would be a more likely.
But it's a contradiction. If the Crown and Parliament is sovereign, then by definition nothing else can be.
Could I just ask you the nature of the presentation this afternoon? I presume we're going to talk about the reasons why a constitution should be enforced as opposed to the individual elements of the constitution itself. Is that correct?
We will get to that.
Because you've already raised for me about 30 or 40 questions.
Okay.
And they mostly relate to the sovereignty issue, because the sovereignty issue was in fact settled very quietly and very much under the counter in Brussels in 2014. Now, the Commission asked the group of constitutional experts to determine whether Scotland was or was not a separate country in the sense of membership of the European Union, because their argument had always been that the UK had joined as a single country. In effect, constitutional experts said, no, that's not true, because under the Treaty of Union, Scotland was never accepted as being amalgamated with England. It was always agreed to be a sovereign nation, and in fact, a recent vote in Parliament has underlined that.
Yes.
The advice given to the European Union was that if Scotland voted for independence in 2014, the EU had no legal right to expel them from the European Union. They had no legal right to say you have to turn around and reapply. And that left a very strong issue about Scotland's sole sovereignty. Whether or not the English government respects that sovereignty, whether or not the English constitution can accommodate that sovereignty is immaterial. The sovereignty itself exists. And this case came up in three separate cases: Kosovo, Catalonia and Quebec. Now, in the case of Kosovo, they actually made a representation to the International Court to determine whether their declaration, and remember Kosovo had no history of individual sovereignty as a country, the court accepted that they had gone through the correct procedure, and that if they made a unilateral, as you'd like to put it, declaration of independence, which I think, by the way, can't happen in Scotland, because I don't think, I'll go into that in a minute, but in effect, what was said was that Kosovo's steps were internationally acceptable and would be recognised by the United Nations. And when we get to Catalonia, certainly the behaviour of the Spanish authorities relied on Franco-era laws, basically. And that is just wrong. But at the same time, Catalonia has no sovereign integrity. That has to be established in the same way.
There's a long debate about that. If you'll allow me to finish my remarks, then we'll open it up to everything. But let me get through this, and then I'll certainly get back to that. So I want to first give my own view of the survey and what the conclusion that I reached about so it's in this context that the results of the panel-based survey of Scots constitutional literacy are so fascinating, although they've affirmed what I've observed in my experience in Scotland over the past 7 years. Scots overwhelmingly support the fundamental rights, values, and democratic processes that a coherent codified constitution can provide. However, the minimum amount of civic education most Scots have received have not provided them with the conceptual frameworks, vocabulary, and exposure to other constitutional experiences necessary to make that connection. And so having been raised in the U.S., and I got involved in the Scottish debate back in 2012, I was struck by how little recognition there was among Scots of the value of the written Constitution. And many I spoke to associated the Constitution, for example, with gun violence in the United States because of the Second Amendment, or the police needing a warrant to search a house, or the recitation of the right to remain silent under Miranda warning to those arrested by the police. So for them, a few fragments of the U.S. constitutional principles constituted the totality of their understanding of a written constitution. And more concerning this sort of obliviousness to the importance of a constitution, not only is an indispensable referendum campaign tool, but more fundamentally is the basis for a new Scottish state, also extends to several high-profile pro-independence columnists and independence officials and elected officials I've spoken with. The prevailing attitude can be characterized as, yes, we need a written constitution, but we need independence first, so we'll do it later. And it was almost as if it was somehow materialized out of thin air. Maybe we'll have a convention, but there was no real, advanced thing. Okay, how do we? And I know John can speak much more to that than I can in terms of the kind of the reticence of, many, including, people in the government to engage and say, yeah, that's a good idea, we need to do this. It was more like, oh, we'll get to it. It's on the list, but it's not the first on the list, which it should be. So what Scots lacked, in my view, during the 2014 campaign was a conversation and education campaign over the positive attributes that could be included in a written constitution. This collective conversation could have addressed how systemic societal problems Scots have lived with under centuries could be substantively addressed to make Scotland a more pleasant, egalitarian, humane place for all inhabitants to live their lives and pursue their dreams, and whose children enjoy increasing opportunities to live in Scotland and not have to migrate elsewhere. The ways in which a written constitution could underpin and help realize these ideals was not discussed. And this was in large part because the UK establishment did not want this conversation to take place. And as John can attest, used ruthlessly underhanded Daily Mail hit jobs and lawsuits to sully the reputation of the Constitutional Commission. And unfortunately, it was effective in the heat of the 2014 campaign when things were going so fast, and one hit job can derail the stuff at the most crucial times. In my own experience, I remember back in 2013, the BBC contacted me, invited me, and then disinvited me to do an interview about Scotland's membership in the EU, presumably because it dawned on the producer that I might reveal information that was factually correct or make arguments that were empirically valid. The reason they were willing to go to such lengths is that once a serious conversation about the Constitution began, Scots would quickly figure out what a sham of a constitution they'd been living with, since 1707, and also question the legitimacy of many of the UK governing structures. So, another reason that this conversation, and this is where you all fit in, others watching and participating fit into this, is that prior to 2014, a Scottish demos had not been constituted. Demos, of course, being the foundation of a democracy. And there's a lot of it's also the word polity is also very similar. The idea of the body politic. And in the Scottish context, I would define it, the demos, as the ordinary citizens who consciously form a political entity to engage in an ever-broadening discussion over how to found and continuously improve the Scottish state and, by extension, and broader Scottish society. And in my view, the Scottish demos was definitively constituted in reaction to the vow. Leading up to the September 2014 referendum, the blizzard of propaganda continuously blared, in essence, that Scotland was better off under the UK Constitution and could not possibly build a better one. The lies and the propaganda were too loud for a thoughtful, rational discussion. And the vow was the, mendacious yet feeble attempt to propose a better constitutional arrangement if there was a no vote. However, David Cameron's advocacy of English votes for English laws the morning after the referendum shattered the illusion that the vow was anything other than a mendacious drunkard's promise made to convince his wife not to leave him. So by this time, the emerging but not yet constituted Scottish demos had undergone a political enlightenment. Having been civically engaged and educated about UK and Scottish constitutional arrangements to a degree never before seen, Scots could now astutely observe whether the vow or anything approaching the Brunian, as close to federalism status, would actually be delivered. And the sham of the Smith Commission could not even fulfill the most basic clause of the vow, that is, the permanence of the Scottish Parliament, because the UK Constitution is based on feudal quicksand rather than a solid codified constitutional rock. And since then, especially through social media, Facebook, Twitter, and others, in my view, a true Scottish demos has emerged. And we're here together speaking. And I like to think of it as kind of an online Quaker meeting over Scotland's constitutional future. And I don't know, for those of you who have not attended, I have Quaker ancestors on my American side. It's a beautiful spiritual meeting is a very beautiful spiritual experience. There's no minister or priest who leads the service. There's no dogma you're required to believe without fear of ostracism and even punishment. Parishioners simply sit silently in quiet contemplation stand up and speak when they wish to describe their inner light, free to construct their own spiritual concepts and probe their own spiritual depths. Others may follow, standing up and speaking. Others may, or the entire meeting may pass with no one speaking. It's up to the individual. And I view the Scottish demos in a similar fashion, free to think beyond the feudal confines of the UK state and realize, of course we can build a better state. And Brexit has confirmed that beyond a reasonable doubt. And so it's in this spirit that myself and other citizens and academics and software engineers have created this Clyde-Built constitution. And for me, it's fundamentally based on the empiricism of the Scottish Enlightenment philosopher David Hume, which holds that true empirical knowledge can only be attained through experience and measurement, which is the basis of the scientific method. So we're looking, as we develop this work, it's going to be based on science. It's not going to be based on, bizarre ideological or religious ideas, but we will try to incorporate basic human charity, humility, love, and respect. And so going back to this notion of being a Clyde-Built, and I've gotten some really funny comments from different people. Well, it's Clyde-Built, but I live in Edinburgh. I feel left out. I'm like, that's not what we mean. It's a quality of construction. It's not, Clyde ships were built on the Clyde, but they sailed all across the world. So but I just wanted to mention that as an aside because some of the when you put things out there, you get that reaction. It's somewhat jarring sometimes. So this constitution will be developed according to the same ethos that Scots built such magnificent ships on the Clyde just a couple of meters from here. Thousands of people working to build the hull, the interior structure, the hydraulic systems, the engines, the electrical systems, the fittings, the furniture, so many other crafts and expertise. It was built to last, to be reliable, and something Scots could be damn proud of because of their industrial beauty. They were literally manufacturing floating global cities, which could go all across the planet. Think of all the Scottish brain wattage, and of course others as well, that went into developing the ships, the research, the trial and error, the development of the systems to make them reliable, all with the realization that the quality of their design and craftsmanship was literally a question of life or death for those who traveled on them. And I know, given the same ethos and ingenuity, there's no question that Scots can build a better ship of state than the UK, the ones that they're currently sinking in. But it's also important to remember what an amazing historical opportunity we have before us. Think of all the constitutions that were drafted in immeasurably more dire circumstances after years of war and civil strife. The Spanish Constitution of 1978 was written in the context of the death of Franco after a decades-long dictatorship and thousands of mass graves. And the drafting was heavily influenced by the Franco army generals that wanted to maintain their legal impunity. The Irish Constitution of 1937 was drafted after years of civil war and sectarian conflict when the Catholic Church had an overpowering influence over Irish government and society. So we're now in a context where we can think independently online using modern technology to refine and develop this constitution in a calm, deliberative manner. I mean, it's so important that we realize that we haven't got bombs dropped on us. We haven't got a gun to our head. We can just talk like this. We can talk and online we can do it in this context as well. Also using all the constitutional research, experience, and technology that the world has to offer. Just a little anecdote. My grandfather was a medical professor. And he used to, and he would give really, really difficult exams on to his medical students, because at that time it was so important to remember all of this information about diagnosis. So, for example, and sometimes the students would come to my grandfather after getting a bad grade and say, "Well, Dr. Bennett, that was an unfair question." And my grandfather would say, "Well, if a patient comes to you and says that has a disease you can't diagnose, are you going to say that he's an unfair patient? And while I've always loved that, but it also speaks to now with the modern technology, you can diagnose these things immediately. It's not so important to have all of this information memorized because all of this research is out there. We can consult any, constitutional expert on the planet and get, what about this? What about this? What about this? How would you do this? How would you do that? And it's very much in that spirit that I've been doing this. I've been, I've taken Eliot's basic text. I've talked to different people. I have a friend a colleague in Greece who's a financial. He lived through the Greek crisis. So if anybody knows about what laws would be useful in a constitution for avoiding financial crises, it would be him. And so I've gotten advice from people as well. So, and there are so many more esteemed academics throughout the world who give their right arm to be able to develop a constitution. I mean, they spend all these years studying it, maybe writing articles and publishing them in journals, but to actually participate in the actual drafting. I mean, again, the floodgate, once this gets going, it's, I think that the potential is unlimited. So, and no country, in my view, no country has been in a better position to write the most modern, democratic, adaptable, and non-corrupt constitution on the planet. But we really do need to accelerate the pace of development. We don't know exactly what's going to happen in the coming weeks. We don't know. It's quite a ride. I'm fasten your seatbelts, but this development needs to continue apace, because as soon as there is a decision, as soon as they say, Scotland say independence, the banks, the special interest groups, the multinational corporations, all the other oligarchical forces will come down like a ton of bricks, because they will want to make Scotland subservient to international capital. And we must construct an impenetrable constitutional shield for Scottish democracy, which prevents corporate corruption from irretrievably setting in. If Scots allow multinational corporations, Rupert Murdoch and other vile media moguls, hedge fund managers, launder dark money demagogues like Aaron Banks and Nigel Farage to strangle and pollute the Scottish government in the same way that has been very successfully done to the US and UK, Scottish independence will have been a complete failure. We want to get away from it, and we want to create something much better, much more democratic, and wish the US and the UK best. But again, and the potential is there. But again, we need to continue with this, because as soon as there's a vote, you're going to have all these people flying in. Oh, you need to do it this way. You need to do it that way. The banks need to be regulated like this. Oh, the oil needs to be regulated like that. We need to have the bases down so that when they do come, we say this is how you're going to operate. You're not going to tell us. We're going to tell you. And that get to that point. So, in conclusion, despite my deep concerns about a U.S. Constitution, I've got plenty of objections. And I've already stated how I feel about it. I can categorically affirm that it's very important to have a written constitution and to build and to construct a functioning democracy. The UK Constitution and the UK Scotland status, the UK establishment made every effort to suppress it in 2014. However, the Scottish demos has definitively emerged. We're living proof. And they won't be able to stop the conversation. And so now that the discussion has begun, how can we employ ingenuity, precision, science, research, and most of all, goodwill to build an enduring, adaptable constitution and legal system? So please, of course, sign up to become a user on ScotIndyPod.com and help us collectively develop this constitution. I spent over 6 years developing the hull of the Scottish ship of state, but it's not yet watertight. There's still leaks, and I haven't built the floors, the plumbing. I haven't installed the electrical system, or the fixtures, or anything else. And I don't care how much formal education you have. I don't care what degrees you have. The only qualification that I'm looking for to help is goodwill, and the desire to learn and to get into something, to make it a research topic of yours that you can contribute as much as you want. Everyone has relevant experience that can help make it a better governing system, and of course everyone can learn. And the magic of modern technology will allow us to work together and achieve it, even if we're not physically assembled. And so this constitution will be the canvas upon which the Scottish state is planned. And we didn't have a canvas last time. So people are going to campaign and they say, vote for independence. Why? What about the Queen? What about this? What about that? And they didn't have answers. And they might have had to say, well, it'll be that way, or we're working towards that, all that. But this is the basis. This is a reassurance. So they say, what about this? The campaigners can have their iPad right there. That's what we'll do. This is the way it'll be. And this is not, and it's not definitive because we will be refining it over time. I mean, this is not, it's like any other engineering project. It's not perfect. You got to work out the bugs. You got to work out the glitches. You got to work out like any software, any development project. So this is not the definitive draft, but it is a basis upon which we can go forward with obviously very broad participation. So register on the site if you haven't already. It's still in full development. We will have much more to offer on the site, different resources, different constitutions that you can all comment on and that can all inform this draft as we move forward. So, but what the beauty of this is homeless people can help develop housing on their cell phone. People on benefits can help design the Scottish welfare system. Labor unions can help write labor law. Hopefully, Andy Whiteman could lend his expertise to write any land reform law. And the list goes on. Doctors can help write medical law. All of this in complete transparency with the capacity to fine-tune the law over time as bugs emerge in the governing software, and they can be fine-tuned. So just determined, given the collective wisdom of Scots and people of goodwill throughout the world, we can further develop this constitution to update Scotland's governance structure from Windows 1707 to Scots OS X 2019 with mechanisms designed to continuously update the governing software to keep pace with and adapt to a rapidly changing world. And when we succeed, we will have created the world's first empirically based constitution developed scientifically rather than politically, and if we don't, who will? Thank you.
Almost time for questions. So anyone who's not asked a question so far, if you want to feel free. Yes, sir.
I would like to ask where are we going to go with this? Now, to me, what it sounds like, you've got it covered, you've done the marketing research, there's tweaks and perks still to be done, which you've just explained. However, you need to have a bigger authority to bring that out to the people. I would like to see yourselves taking this to the Scottish Government and using the Scottish Government to enshrine this on the Day of Independence. If at all possible, do it without independence. Get it up and running, because the benefits you have explained outweigh everything that we currently have. So to have that enshrined, to say, here, this is what will happen on the first day of Scottish independence. Here's the rules, the regulations, here's the authority of how we're going to run our country. That's a powerful statement. Yeah. And you bring that out and get the Scottish Government to work with you to push that out.
That's very much the intention. We're still developing the website. What we're going to do is we're going to have a list of all of the MSPs, and we're going to ask people throughout Scotland to contact them, and we already have, and there have already been appointments made, to go and lobby their MSP individually to support this document. That's one of the things that we're going to do, and we certainly welcome other suggestions of how to get it more broadly accepted.
Is because it's important to get the process right. Let me explain what I mean by that. A constitution developed, however one defines the term responsibility, that's hugely important, because there is no God-given right for a state to work, right? There is nothing anywhere that says a new state will in fact function well. You have to actually sit down and develop the measures and the procedures to make sure that is the case. I'll give you an example. I don't want to indulge in hyperbole here, but you can think of Zimbabwe, you can think of other places, which started off full of good intentions but fell apart fairly quickly. And the reason for that was it was possible for the first government of that state, that new state, to modify the constitution. And it did. It said, right, this is what was put to the people before they voted, but now we're in charge as the first government. We've decided to abandon some of these constraints and protections. So there's no God-given right for a state to succeed. You have to think about these things very thoroughly in advance. And that's why people become, you may remember at the beginning I talked about reassurance. That's why it's very important. So my answer to your question, and I'm sorry it takes so long to get to an answer, is that I think this ought to be inspired by yes groups. I think the driving force ought not necessarily to be a government, because the whole point of a constitution, fundamentally, is it's the overarching law of a state. Other laws are subservient to that overarching law. In other words, it's out of the reach of day-to-day politicians and day-to-day politics. That is the point of a constitution. And that's what provides the reassurance for people who are not, for example, supportive of major constitutional change. Their concern is that that first government that takes power, right, will be a vindictive government. And it will exercise its vindictiveness upon those who do not support its emergence or its creation. So it is hugely important.
Well, it's one way that the Key in Westminster could stop the Scottish Government putting into place a constitution before the voting.
In my view, no, at least in the way we're doing it. The way I look at it, we're shadowing the Scottish government right now with this document, and we're able to develop it in a way that they're not at this point. Because if they were to actually develop a law about a constitution, you'd still have to go through the whole Westminster system with all the consultations, with all this and with all that, and then of course get royal assent at the end, which and it's a very long process. And so this we're doing completely independently of it. We're trying to get, I've spoken to several MPs and MSPs who are very much in favor of it, which is a new one. For example, I was at the SNP conference a couple of months ago, and I was at a conference with Philippa Whitford and the MSP. She's the new. She's created the new welfare agency, the Scottish Welfare Agency.
Freeman.
It's not Freeman. It's someone else. But anyway. The MSP was like she was talking about the kind of emerging welfare system and how it has care and it's hard and how it it's not this privatized whatever the Department of Work and Pensions. But you could tell from her thing that she's like, is it going to last? Can this? How long will it go on? Because she's so used to the whole thing where the next government can come in and wipe it out. And so I talked to Philippa Whitford after this, and I said, well, this is where a written constitution comes in. Is that you're able to put in place structures that say that if this is put into place, that you can't have a government come in and wipe it out. And I talked to her at length after that, and she was really, it was a convert. I mean, I think she was sort of been not a little not apprehensive, but just it hadn't entered into her head about it. And I talked to her the next day for half an hour, 45 minutes, and she was like, right on. So it's just a question of getting to them and showing them that this is how it could be different. Again, I certainly encourage you as well to, but these people are convincible. As I said, it comes from a lack of civic education, and especially if you're living in the UK, why would you want to give people a civic education if they learn about how bizarrely the UK government works? So I just think that people are convincible.
No, there's nothing. I mean, the Scottish government, the yes movement, for example, anyone here via the website or otherwise, they could actually formulate a Scottish constitution. It's a very separate matter about how to validate that constitution. That's a separate issue. I can't see how the Westminster government would have any influence over that, because they would say it's an empty gesture. They would say, since you don't have a state, why would you want to have a constitution? But that's because of the way they see constitutions. I mean, for example, you could reduce, if you wanted to, and I don't think it would be unfair to put it this way, you could reduce the UK constitution to one sentence. You wouldn't need all of this stuff, or flip chart. You could reduce it to one sentence, and it's this. The UK constitution is whatever the government of the day with a working majority says it is. Full stop. End of discussion. That's why, for example, recently, the government was taken to task in the House of Commons on the basis that the House of Commons had voted, I think unanimously previously, that the full legal advice on Brexit would be made available to Parliament. That was unequivocal. The government knew it was going to lose that vote, so it withdrew its opposition. So it passed unanimously. Last week, the government said, we will issue a truncated version, i.e. a summarised version. And it was raised by the opposition as being a point of principle. The House had voted, the government was denying the House what it had asked for. But they will not proceed with it. They will not get, right? There is no authority. Because the government of the day controls everything, right? There's no separation of powers, as Mark has said. Right? Now, there may be a rigmarole whereby the opposition, various forms, combines and passes motions saying we have no confidence in this, that, and the next thing. But unless a majority of the House of Commons votes against the government, right, that they, in fact, control the Constitution.
Very quickly, compare that to Nixon in the early 1970s with the Watergate tapes. During the hearings, they discovered that they recorded all of these, every conversation had been on the White House, and the Watergate committee found out tapes. What tapes? And then it disclosed that they recorded everything. And then, so they subpoenaed the tapes, and Nixon said, no, executive privilege, Supreme Court, unanimous, turn them over, he turned them over. That's the perfect, example of how these things work differently when there is a constitutional function.
So eventually, it has to validate the plebiscite.
Yes, it would generally happen through a plebiscite. And what would happen is that a constitution would be drafted, and it would be put to the people for endorsement. Because without their endorsement, it would not be a valid document. Now, the separate question is whether the Westminster government would recognise such a constitution. You could argue it's academic, because it would be there, used as a site.
It's open to absolutely everybody, and there are other groups, and we have Ronnie from the Scottish Constitutional Centre on Constitutional Studies. He wanted to come, he wasn't available, but I've told them, get on the site, and put every good idea that you have into it. This is my baby, so I'm not going to necessarily, I'm not going to say, okay, we'll use yours as the basis, but I'm open to absolutely every idea, every participant, and anybody who has goodwill and good ideas, it will be in there. Relatively quickly, I just wanted to explain beyond the Constitution. I've developed the framework for what I call the corpus of Scottish law. And it's divided into different spheres, and it's just a framework right now, but of course you can go and look at it online, the way it's organized. But that's one of the most important opportunities we have, because all over the world, the way the legal system works in the UK and the US, you have these bodies of law that have been developed over decades, if not centuries. And so you all have these different laws on the books from different centuries, from different times. And so if you take something like medical law, there might be one law passed in 86, there might be another law passed in 72. And so when you're talking about what is medical law, it is very different to coordinate. So in this one, we take theory of law and then we develop it in a very coherent framework. And also talk about the justiciability of the rights and how it, and just describe in detail the entire legal system for that sphere of law, as well as the institutional law as well. So, thanks.
Two more questions from social media. Lindsay asked, that last question is from Paul. Lindsay asked, has the Constitution been put to the Scottish Government? And if so, what was the response? As I said before, it formed part of the 2014 offer in the referendum. I'm not aware that the Scottish Government has produced an amended version or has endorsed the 2014 version, and that may be a question people here might want to raise.
I submitted my version as well. I know that John and Elliot submitted their ideas. I submitted, and I got a receipt. I said thank you very much. I got an official receipt of it. But obviously, after the no vote, then they didn't have much use for it. But they've got all the materials.
And I know that the Scottish Government were in touch. Their officials called me as a result of the coverage that appeared in the Sunday National. That's what the copies here if you'd like one. They got in touch to ask questions about the provenance of the survey, i.e. how many Scots were included. I think they were concerned that it was only a subset of the GB poll, which of course it wasn't. In fact, it was very comprehensive. We have lots of information about the about people across this island feel about constitutions. And again, it's a huge, rich vein of information. And it's all there. My own sense of it, it's a slow burn. There are one or two people interested in constitutions, including yourselves, but by and large, there is no great enthusiasm out there. But you have to start somewhere. And there is great enthusiasm for human rights. There's great enthusiasm for fair elections, but people don't draw the connection between those rights and the protections that they will need. They assume it because they've always been there. Paul, Paul's got two questions, and maybe a different point. What would keep the Rupert Murdochs of the world at bay? What form of words? Well, I think we've already addressed that.
Yeah, I can talk a little bit about that. One of the institutions that I put in there is I forget the exact name I used, but basically a media regulator, which regulates based on integrity and accuracy, and also validates media institutions based on, among other things, their accuracy and their respect for human rights. I mean, you have the Daily Mail doing these hit jobs against people, invading people's privacy. Under these rules, they would not be validated. They would not be allowed. It's hard because with the internet, anybody can write anything. But there's also a question of how these things can be, regulated, which I invite all of you to help participate in developing.
You can see the problem, because how can you have freedom of speech and freedom of expression, and at the same time say we don't want them to be?
It can be worked out. It just needs a bit of time, but that one really needs.
Well, we could always reconvene at some other stage.
Fine. Where I'm coming from is not so much on the nitty-gritty of the Constitution, because as you pointed out, it's a work in progress and it will probably go on being so. But what I am concerned about are two issues. First of all, I don't see a strong element in the independence movement, either through the Scottish Government, through the SNP, or through the people themselves, to take this up and run with it. So there's a long way to go to put that.
So two excellent questions that I made. The answer to your second question is why we did what we did. And thanks to the far-sightedness of the Scottish Independence Foundation in sponsoring the poll, we would not have actually measured the degree of lack of awareness. Right now, because you have to start somewhere. You have to form a base, and then once you form a base, you can then start to build something. We didn't know how extensive the lack of awareness was until we did the survey. And it's interesting. It is class-based. In other words, more people in the ABC group are comfortable with constitutional issues than elsewhere at the CD. So right away, you've got a situation where you could develop an educational program, and I hope somebody will, and I would be happy to participate in it, that makes constitutional information available to everyone, because that's what's needed. It needs to be web-based, and in order to do this exercise, you have to do the first part. You have to do the education part of it. And I don't criticise anyone for the lack of awareness, because we've had hundreds of years of people being told, you don't have to worry your digital head, this will all be taken care of. It's well above your pay grade, you don't have to worry, you do have to worry. It's not above your pay grade, it's at everyone's disposal, and I would go further, it's everyone's responsibility in here and beyond to extend people's awareness of this as an issue and how fundamentally important it is. I think the time as you go out and talk to people, you'll be met with exactly that response, which is why we did this work, why I would strongly recommend you go to the Scottish Independence Foundation website and take advantage of the data sets. Look to see which groups in society are already somewhere there, which groups would need more help. It's divided along political too. There are certain issues that are peculiar to men over 55 who feel more strongly about certain issues.
And on a day-to-day government issue, I have concerns about the SNP. In other words, in an independent Scotland, I would really be for someone else to vote for. At the moment, the SNP get my vote simply because when it gets down to Westminster, they are the only authority. They are the only people who stand up for Scotland's interest. So they get my support, but as I say, on a day-to-day political basis, I'm not quite so sure. I don't like their reaction to many things.
The research has confirmed that. This and elsewhere, there are people who have major reservations about voting yes.
And that worries me. It worries me a lot because when I see some of the behaviour that's going on at the moment, the clock's ticking, we're in the 59th minute of the 11th hour, and we're talking about a constitution. We should have it wrapped up, it should be there in front of everybody. But we are out of time. I mean, you say you don't know what is going to happen, but I think we have only two options. It's either in or out of the EU. And if it's out, it's the hardest of outs, because I don't think it's going to get that message.
There's also possibilities. I mean, the reality is that if we leave, then all of the protections that the EU afforded will disappear. And that means that people who need support of any kind could find themselves in severe jeopardy.
And we're currently pulling ourselves together for the declaration of independence in one form or another before March the 29th, because I think after March the 29th we'll be dead in the water. And there's a hell of a lot of people in the SNP who will not buy that. And that worries me. It worries me when I hear senior SNP politicians talking about let's have a referendum in 2021, 2022. The government will be all over our faces by then. Hollywood will be a museum for something or other. It won't happen. So this is why I'm saying the time that we've got is so short. How are we going to make this actually work?
Sorry to interrupt. Let me ask you what you plan to do.
Well, at the moment I have, I'm working with the National Register. We are sourcing and delivering leaflets for delivery by local yes groups, because they are the only people who are willing to get out there and put stuff through people's doors. We're trying to make resources available to groups who may have few members but have got lots of ideas. We're making resources available across the country so that we could turn up at a demonstration and we can provide material, actual visual material that the organisers can use. I am writing now 4 international magazines, not on issues of the constitution but on constitutional issues, which is why I raised these matters of Kosovo and Quebec and the like. And what I'm getting back, unofficially, is a lot of support for Scotland's position. In other words, if the Scottish Government pulled MPs out of Westminster tomorrow and said, we're taking independence, we have declared independence by removing our MPs from Westminster, the information I get so far is that the European Union and the United Nations would accept that as a legal definition of Scotland's independent sovereignty. But this matter of the Constitution Yes, it worries me. I mean, what you've said really does worry me.
So let me be very precise then. How could you encourage people in the S groups to take up some of, maybe all of the points that we've been discussing today?
Well, one way, the first way that I can do it now is as soon as I get back. Sorry, it won't be as soon as I get back, it'll be tomorrow morning. First of all, I'll have a very hungry fat on my DNA. But as soon as I possibly can, I'll go online, because we've pulled all the independent supporting Facebook groups together. I have 3 or 4 Facebook friends. I disseminate the information to them. One of them in particular can make sure at least 5,000 Facebook contributors will get that information. What I need to do is, I've been on the website, so I haven't made contributions, but I've been looking at what is on there already. What I would like to do is to create a précis.
What's that?
A précis. A contraction.
It's exactly what I was going to propose.
Something that someone can read in 5 minutes and not in an hour and a half. Get it out there as a post. Straight away we can put that out as a post, and I can guarantee that every single supporting group on Facebook. Yes, I will have, please.
Yeah, it's a much issued version of what I sent to them.
I will study this at my leisure.
And you'll see it takes more of a daily record approach to the subject than granted. And that's because you have to make it impact.
That's fine, because people don't want long words.
No, they don't. Could I strongly recommend that you provide people with the link to the SIF database, to the SIF, Scottish Independent Foundation?
I will do, yes.
Because all the data sets there.
I will do that.
And you don't have to sweat through all that stuff. You can come to take advantage of that. They very kindly arranged for all of that to be there.
And in the coming days, I would be happy to do a very brief synopsis of what is contained in the draft and try to simplify it as much as possible and have it addressed and invite people to go and look at it. And
we probably need to bring things to a close. I'm aware that it's been a long session. You've been very, very patient. I hope you find it helpful. I would like to say in particular a big thank you to Independence Live, who made it possible for people who couldn't make it today to share in these discussions. I would like for the process to be more interactive. Maybe if there's an appetite, we can have more meetings of this nature, perhaps next year, if that makes sense. But that's down to yourself and people you feel this subject is of interest to them. So I'd like to, if I may, close that and thanking everyone who made this meeting possible, and in particular Mark McNaught. Thank you very much.
So there you go. Hope you enjoyed that. We'll get another episode out soon, and we'll get on to a different topic. That was 3 on the same topic in a row. Just a last little thing, if you can like and subscribe our YouTube channel as well, that would be useful. We're on Facebook. Everything you do to help share the podcast and get it out there is much appreciated. Thanks. Speak to you next time, and I'll leave you with this.
Offshore drilling is completely safe. You're getting sleepy. Tax cuts for the rich create new jobs. You're getting sleepy. Financial corporations will police themselves, and illegal aliens are stealing all your pens. Now when I count to 3 and snap my fingers, you'll awake refreshed and vote Republican. White people are the real victims of racism. You're getting sleepy. Fox News is fair and balanced. Sleepy. health care is a privilege and not a right. We can work together to wipe out the middle class. Now when I count to 3 and snap my fingers, you'll awake confused and vote Republican. I'm not saying Barack Obama is a foreign-born Islamist puppy eater. I'm not saying that. I'm saying you decide. There's no evidence to suggest that Nancy Pelosi is a 1,000-year-old Nazi vampire. But that's what I heard. Somebody said that. It was me. Democrats want to put you in a re-education camp and kill your grandma and bring Stalin back to life. Now when I count to 3 and snap my fingers, Republican. Ooh, government is the problem. Ooh, vote for us and we'll prove it. John Boehner uses no tanning products. Sleepy. Newt Gingrich doesn't make shit up. Sleepy. Ben Quayle is gonna knock the hell out of Washington. Ronald Reagan. Sleepy, sleepy. So when I count to 3 and steal the White House china, you'll vote Republican. When I snap my fingers and invade Ontario, you'll vote Republican. And when I drag the nation through 8 years of carnage and incompetence and leave the place a bigger mess than Lindsay Lohan's trailer, then blame the Democrats for cleaning up too slow. You will awake refreshed, confused, and somewhat paranoid, and you'll remember nothing. And vote Republican. Almost comatose. 1, 2, 3. Mitt Romney, everybody. Partisan? Oh, a little.